Jai Baba to you all. We're here today with Nick Principe to discuss, remember, share our love for Meher Baba. And I don't know what you have in mind to talk about today, Nick, but why don't you get us started? Jai Baba to you.
Hey, Bob. Well, the first thing I want to start with, when Baba came to the States, I believe it was the first trip, Erich did not come with him. It was right after the New Life. And Baba really wanted Erich to come with him. But Erich, he said, Baba, I'm too tired. I cannot. He was exhausted. Anybody who's read about the New Life understands, they were weeks and weeks where they had in little sleep or no sleep. So anyway, Baba expressed his disgust with Erich, but then he told Erich, he said, okay, you don't have to go. What I want you to do is travel around India with Pendu and spread my name. Tell people about me. And Erich said, Baba, I'm not a public speaker. Up until that very moment, all he had done was he was Baba's companion, his night watchman, his, sort of aide de camp, you might say. And he said, I don't know what to say. And Baba said, who do you think will be talking? He said, you say my name, you remember me, and it will be me that will be talking through you. So I want to start with that I'm asking Baba for me and for everybody else to just ask Baba to speak through us. I don't want this to be the voice of Nick Principe. I would prefer it to be the voice of Meher Baba. I don't know if that's possible or not, but that's what I think I should ask for. So that's what I'm going to do because I don't really have opinions. The only thing I have is experience because I know that I'm not in charge. So I'm going to start with, the very first thing as you finish the last um, uh, time just before I came on. There was a fellow, and I believe if I got it right, Diane, you said something about sharing Baba's stories.
Yeah.
So I was sitting in Mandali Hall with Erich, and in those days, Erich would ask people how they came to Baba. He'd want to know their Baba story. And, people would, I heard about Baba, I was having lunch and I overheard his name or I saw a book or whatever it was. And most people, pardon me, were fairly brief and to the point. And and Momley Hall was fairly crowded. And this one fellow, when Erich asked him about how he came to Baba, this guy started out giving his life history. First, I lived in Chicago, but I didn't like scrambled eggs, and my mother would send me to boarding school. And with all of us sitting in the hall, just looking at each other, there wasn't a mention of Baba. And little by little, people started to get up and left Mandali Hall because this guy must have gone on. It's hard to be certain, but I bet it was 15 minutes of him talking about himself. And I was very, very close. I was this close to getting up and leaving. I was sitting across from Erich. He, of course, would sit on that little cushion, and I was under the window on the opposite side. And I thought, I'm going to get out of here because I'm just wasting my time. And just before I got up to leave, Erich got really upset. His eyes flashed. And he said, where are you all going? And I said, uh-oh, something's happening here. So I relaxed. And then he said, you all better get used to listening to each other because what are you going to do when we're gone? So remembering Baba, telling Baba stories, I think it's sharing memories. It evolves. Not everybody is. I think about storytelling like singing. Not everybody can sing. There are those of us who I sing in the shower, and sometimes I think that the shower, the tiles would fall off the wall if I got loud because that's how bad my singing is. But I'm pretty good at telling stories. So there are other people who I would say, for instance, Jamie Newell. He puts all his what he's got to tell about Baba, he puts in his music. So for those of us who want to share Baba experiences, Baba stories, I would say that evolves because as we listen to ourselves, whether even we just record, I mean, I've practiced telling stories because the Mandali would encourage me to do that. And when I would listen to myself on a recording, just a little handheld recorder, it was only then that I realized how much I introduced myself and talked about myself and not talked about Baba or the Mandali or the experience. So I would suggest that to anybody. If you want to tell Baba stories, practice it like you would practice singing. Nobody gets up on a stage and all of a sudden just opens their mouth and starts singing. At least nobody that I know. Everybody I know who's a singer, and I know quite a few, they put hours and hours and hours into practice for it. So I think, isn't Baba worth that? Can't we dedicate time to searching out memories, um, going back, thinking about our personal experiences? Uh, Matter of fact, one other little side story with that, which is, I think, very important, that I used to spend quite a bit of time with Fred Winterfeld um, and Ella at the Gateway. I lived in Myrtle Beach in the early 70s. And I would hear Fred tell little tales about Baba, and occasionally I would ask him something about Baba. What did Baba say about divorce, or what did he say about putting a pet to sleep, for instance? Just little strange things that I hadn't read anywhere about Baba, so I asked Fred if he had any info. And Fred almost always, when I would finish my question, he would stop. He would kind of maybe close his eyes, look off in the distance for a while, think about it for a moment, and then he would respond. And I asked him why, because I noticed him doing that. He said, Nick, he said, when you share Baba stories, don't let it be about you. He said, let it be about Baba. He said, you're married. He said, you don't go around talking about your intimate life with your wife. He said, because it diminishes it. It doesn't value it. So don't talk about the very intimate things with Baba. And he said, the important thing is tell a story that might help others. Don't tell a story that's just, I saw lightning coming out of the fireplace. That has to do with you. It doesn't have anything to do with anybody else. It's not something, whether Baba gives that gift, and it doesn't mean it didn't happen. It's just it was a blessing. It was a gift from Baba for that person. It doesn't mean he's going to do the same thing for somebody else. So, so that is, I think, important. To eliminate as much as we can. Baba had said, whenever you hear "I," "me," "my," or "mine," those are words you have to be very careful of. So I'm not sure whether you want, whether the group wants just some random stories. I'd be happy to share those. If anybody has any comments or questions, and please forgive, I just hear the leaf blower out in the backyard where I live. They're really quite lovely about taking care of the property, but it is a little noisy back there. Let me know if it's a problem. Um, so one thing I will share, which I think was rather unique, I was a when I found out about Baba, I had already been in the military, got out of the military, and I was a licensed hairstylist. In the mid 70s, Dr. Goer just out of the blue told me to go to nursing school. I had no idea at all about nursing school. Anyway, came back to Myrtle Beach, ended up going to nursing school. So, what those two professions allowed me was tremendous intimacy with Baba's Mandali. I had a little small hair cutting shop in North Myrtle Beach. Um, so I got to spend time professionally with some of the Mandali, with Adi, with Kitty. Going off to India, I got to, spend time again with the ladies, which was really quite something for a man to spend time with the ladies because I was their hairdresser. Um, but what that did was allow me an intimacy, and I've always been impertinent, so I would ask them questions that now I think I would be too embarrassed to ask them, but at the time, these questions just popped out of my mind. Like I remember asking Kitty one time if she ever cried. I had never seen her cry. Kitty said, "I only cried for Baba's love." I asked her if she ever thought about sex. Can you imagine? I mean, now even as I say it, I'm embarrassed to say it. Here is this wonderful lady who's at that time in her 90s. I was probably in my 50s, and I'm asking her if she ever had sex because I never read anything about her being married or relationships. Many of the other Mandali, Elizabeth was married. There were others who had children, grandchildren. So, but Kitty, there was never a reference about a significant other in her life. And I asked her if she ever had sex, and she said no. She said, "I never once had a lustful thought my entire life." And I just and a little side, almost kind of silly. Baba permitted her one cigarette a day, and we'd go out to dinner, and she'd bum a cigarette at the end of dinner. And I actually have a photo of her smoking a cigarette. And it's so funny because people, refuse to believe that Kitty smoked. And I'm just, uh, all of the Mandali, they were so much Baba's that they did whatever Baba wanted. And when he permitted them, they would take as his prasad. And if he didn't give them permission, they didn't, it disappeared from their lives. So yeah, she was quite marvelous, quite fun to be with. And also the Mandali, for those who see, in the early days, where I was living in Florida, I found out about Baba in the 60s. He was still in the body. And there were no books that I knew of. There were no meetings. However, there was a woman by the name of Ann Forbes who lived in Miami. Baba had referred to Ann Forbes as one of his Western Mandali. There are many people who don't even know who she was, but I got to go visit her. So this is how I would spend my time. I didn't have Baba books to read. No internet, of course. No, I had been to the center. First time I went to the center was closed. It was in the late 60s. And Fred Ella they would go up. There's a town in the mountains of North Carolina. I forget the name of it. It might be called Little Switzerland. I'm not sure. But Fred told me it reminded him very much of how he grew up in Austria. So that during the very hot summer times, uh, Fred Ella would go up to the mountains. And in those days, prior to Baba dropping the body, there were, I think, the only way people found, there were a few people who went to the center, Marshall Hay and people like that, theists. But most people could only go to the center by invitation. I mean, that's when Baba was there, when Baba was in the body, that's my understanding. Nobody, it's not like now where anybody can make a reservation and stay. It wasn't open to the public. So the first time I went, it was closed. I had absolutely no idea why. It's all the information I found out afterwards. So what I did was try to seek out those people who had physical contact with Baba, and I was fortunate. I was riding back and forth with Erich in, I think, 71. First letter I got from him, and Jal, Baba's brother. So, that was how I got my information about Baba, was from those people who lived with him. Now, a little interesting, kind of a funny story with Erich and Jal, Baba's brother Jal. When I mention Jal, some people think of Jal Bastur. I don't know, he may still be alive, lives at Royal Meribad. But no, this is Jal, Baba's brother Jal. Now, Jal is a few years younger than Baba. Naturally, grew up with Baba. He told me, and this has been documented, that he was his mother's spy. Because during that time, after Baba Jan kissed Baba on the forehead, and Baba started experiencing his whatever that is, unveiling, I guess would be the best way to describe it. And he would wander about the city of Pune, and Shireen was very concerned about him, so she would have Jal follow him. Now, I mean, you can look at, anybody can look up the dates, but I think Jal was 4 or 5 years younger than Baba. He was, was sort of like a teenager. He must have been 14, 15 at this time. So he would follow Baba, as Baba would roam around the city. And of course, one can imagine what Pune was like at the turn of the century. And then he would report back to his mom about what Baba was doing all night. So Jal had this incredible experience with Baba that he was more than happy to share. Now, here along is Erich, who joined Baba as a youngster. And family have been with Baba. There's certainly me nor anybody else who's going to deny the fact that Erich was a unique individual. Baba had said that out of everybody, he enjoyed Erich's company more than anybody else, which is quite a statement coming from the God man. And so now, how these two, for me, gave me two completely different stories, which is the point I wanted to make. So in those days, in the 70s, Erich would take people to various places, whether it was Sakori, Shirdi, to visit the tomb shrines of Upasni, Sai Baba, and he would also be an escort. It would go on a small bus or van. There were very few. The first time I was there, there were 6 Westerners. So it's not crowds like it is now. And Erich took us to Ellora Caves, Happy Valley. And while we were there, I was in my 30s at the time. I was happily married. Um, we are in a Shiva Lingam. Now, if anybody describe what a Shiva Lingam is, Shiva is the god of creation, and the places of worship for those people who are worshippers of Lord Shiva, pardon me, is a cave, a very small cave, probably not much more than it was 12 by 12. And in the middle of this cave is a stone carving of a male phallus. And that carving is the top of the phallus is about, as I remember, about chest high. And at the base of the phallus, which would be about the waist of a normal height person, is the representation of the female vulva. So it's pretty graphic. And there are about 6 or 8 of us in this cave standing around this phallic statue with Erich. And he's explaining to us that there are people who worship Lord Shiva, and he's describing how they, when they come into the cave, they come in with a coconut. They take a coconut and break it over the top, pound it till they break it over the top of this phallus. And as the coconut milk drips down the phallus, they catch it at the base by the vulva, and I know whatever they do with that. I don't remember him saying whether they drank it or took it away or whatever. I don't remember that. And somebody in the group mentioned something about sex. It's a very sexual kind of representation. And Erich, in a very clear voice, says, unless and until one gets over sex, you cannot enter the path of love. Now, at that point, I'm, like I say, 35. My wife is a little 10 years younger. She's in her 20s. And we just look at each other. And when we left the cave, we said, well, we're out of here. We made a mistake because I just wasn't ready to give that up. That was a part of my life at that time. Now, in those days, you could only stay at the Pilgrim Center. No, there was no Pilgrim Center. Forgive me. We would stay in the play, and they would put us up Monday to Friday at Lower Meribad. Some would be assigned to stay in different cabins. Mandali Hall, at the end of Mandali Hall, there were 1 or 2 rooms. And I said there were very, very few Westerners. And you can only be there Monday to Friday. There was no staff to cook. It was the local village woman who would come and prepare food, and so they worked from Monday to Monday evening till Friday lunchtime. Then they would go home to their families for the weekend. And on the weekends, Friday, as soon as we'd leave, we, meaning I was married at the time, we'd go to Pune and we'd spend our time with Jal in Pune. And Jal would take us around, took us to, the places that we went to meet Sumitra, the elephant that Baba fed. We'd take us to his house, where Bobby used to beat his head. We went to Deccan College, the hospital. He would take us to all these places connected with Baba. And that was how we spent the weekend. We'd have a hotel. And Jal and Erich later on also, both of them had the habit with me. I don't know if they did it with others, but they would ask me, what's on your mind? Something's troubling you. Pardon me. So I'm sitting with Jal in the hotel room, and he said, "What's on your mind? What's troubling you?" And I said, "Jal, I think we're gonna go to Air India. We're going back to the States." And we were scheduled to be in India for about almost 3 months. And he said, "Why?" And I told him about what happened with Erich. I said, Erich said, "You're gonna have to give up sex." And I said, I'm not. I didn't. I'm just finding out about Baba, and that seemed to me to be um, more than I was willing to do at the time. And John said to me, and I quote, he said, "Who told you such nonsense?" I said, "Erich." And John said to me, "Erich is new to Baba. He doesn't know what he's talking." He said, "We're a married couple." He said, "If you are married, whatever two people do in that relationship is absolutely." But what I got from that is that in the first place, John was probably the only person who could have ever said that Erich did not have this information right. And I don't think, as I've come to think about it over the years, it's not that Erich was wrong. Erich always held up the highest ideal that a man could aspire to uh, on the path from ordinary man to man becoming closer to divinity. Jal, for those who knew him, was very worldly. Baba had brought him to Hollywood at the latter part of his life. Uh, it, Baba actually told Jal to stay in Pune and to be his representative for Westerners. So during the Great Darshan, all the years after that, until Jal finally passed, when Westerners would go, and we came in those days, many of us who had either a drug background or some had been in prison or whatever it was. Jal was the one who was uh, greeting us and made everybody feel comfortable. There are still people that I know who would Baba lovers who would travel from the States and go to India and would spend more time with Jal than they would going to Mehrabad or Merazad because they didn't feel they felt more their activities were being criticized, their past activities. Well, not that they were doing those things there, but Jal never. Jal was always all embracing for everybody. So anyway, it caused me to really think that regardless of what one hears from anybody except Baba, But you hear it from Monty, from Erich, from whoever. Um, you're going to find somebody else who may say something completely the opposite. And it's up to us to figure out, um, you know, take a take what you will from each one.
Excuse me, Nick. Would you like
Yes,
to take a question now?
sure,
We have
absolutely.
Alan Ray. Alan Ray, go ahead.
Thank you, Diana. So, Nick,
Yes, sir.
I don't know who you are. I've been with
Okay.
Bob for 54 years, and to the best of my recollection, this is our first meeting right here and now.
Okay,
Uh,
sir.
be that as it may, um, I embrace your way. What a gift. Thank you. And before you came on, I guess you heard a little bit of my story.
Yes, sir.
Diane mentioned that you came early,
Yes, sir.
and um, I was half asleep. Uh, Baba woke me up. I could have easily slept through my talk, but
Yeah.
the gift that you gave me, instead of my coming to Baba's story, I will reframe that as how Baba drew me into his net of love. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Secondly, you talked about Shiva, the phallus, and the lingam.
Mm-hmm.
And in 1969, at the EAB recording studios in Lewiston, Maine, my rock band, we were the first American rock band to record with Eddie Bushy in Lewiston, Maine. And it was a 45. We were in the recording studios for a total of 3 hours. There was no mixing, uh, nothing of the sort. And what I thought was the A side of this 45, well, it turned out there was more interest in the B side, which was entitled Plastic Bags. Plastic bags still exist. If you use one, you take a risk. Synthetic fibers seem so strong. Don't you know that they're all wrong? Well, the A side was called A Peace on Earth. That's Piece, A Peace on Earth. And it opens like this. And I hadn't thought about this. Well, I can't say I've never thought about it since 1969, but it's not really in my everyday consciousness. So the A side, A Peace on Earth, starts like this. And you reminded me of it, or having to do with being in front of Shiva there. Love is all around, phallic symbols on the ground, bodies waiting to be found, golden treasures without sound.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you, thank you, thank you for that remembrance and giving some context to
Yeah.
those lyrics, which I've never really had.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you actually reminded me as I was listening to the tail end of your stories when you mentioned about Melanie. And of course, in those days, I had her the LP that she recorded, and the opening line, which has since been removed, is "Meher Baba lives again." Now you probably know that.
And she always wore a bobble locket,
Yeah,
just like Tuck of Tuck and Patty.
yeah, yeah. Well, I know Tuck and Patty. I've known them for years and years. Met
We've
them
got
in
to
India.
we've got to talk offline, Nick. Uh,
Well,
this is amazing. Um, Tuck and Patty played "You Take My Breath Away," as my bride and I walked down the aisle. They were an integral part of my second marriage ceremony. And I'll be happy to share the backstory of
Yeah,
Tuck and Patty. And this is before they hit the big stage, long before they hit the big stage.
Alan Ray, let's get back to Nick's story, okay?
Of course. Over and out. And how long does this program supposed to go
We're
for,
gonna,
Diane?
we go until 1 o'clock Eastern time, so we have a nice chunk of time ahead of us. So Nick, what
Yes,
a
ma'am.
wonderful story you've told, what a wonderful sharing you, and what else have you been thinking about lately?
Oh, goodness. What I've been thinking about, which is pretty much constant, is what a blessing it is to get old with Baba.
We have a question from
Betty.
Betty, yeah, in West Coast. Would you take another question, another
Oh,
comment?
of course, absolutely. Hi, Betty.
I'm not high. I've not heard your coming to Baba's story. Have you told it here?
Not
Maybe.
on Baba's Zoom, but I'm happy to share it if that's what you'd like.
Yeah.
I have a rather unusual Baba story, I think. This now we're talking about 1967 or 68. I was living in South Florida, Cocoa Beach, just where the Kennedy Space Center is. That's the adjacent town. And I had just gotten out of the military, out of the Air Force. And I had gone to school to become a hairstylist. And I had the opportunity to open a salon. It was an incredible opportunity. It was a house on the beach that had no furniture in it. Everything, it had some permanently installed mirrors, open bookcases. And it was offered at an extremely cheap rent because that's a whole backstory we don't need to get into now. But these were people that worked for the Cape, for Canaveral, for the launches. They all moved to Texas. So there was available property everywhere, very inexpensive. So all of us young hippies moved there so that we could live cheaply on the beach. And I had this house offered to me, living room, old Pecky Cypress, big picture window overlooking the ocean. And there was only one photo in there, and it was a little, maybe 4x6 photo in a frame sitting on this one bookcase that was there. And it said, I have one message to give age after age, and that is to love God. And it was a photo of Meher Baba. And I knew nothing about Baba. And I thought, well, that was nice. Within a very short period of time, I was married. I had a child at that time, a newborn. Long story short, my wife left, took the child. I had no idea where they were. So I decided the best thing to do was to kill myself. So I attempted suicide. Not a serious suicide. Serious suicide is where you put a gun to your head or you jump off a 5-story building. I just went around collecting every pill that I could find, and in those days they were everywhere. And Baba, in his infinite humor and wisdom, I started calling my friends to tell them what I was doing. I had a payphone in the salon. I'm using the payphone to call. Nobody was home. I must have called 4 or 5 people. And I had already taken all these pills. And finally, got this one friend of mine. It was a very dramatic scene because it's nighttime. I'm watching the moon, come up over the ocean, or one or the other. The beautiful light over the ocean, and I'm just sitting there feeling my body relax as all these pills were taking effect. And I finally got this one friend of mine, and I told him what I was doing, and he said, "Oh, really? Are you serious? You really killing yourself?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Tell me," he said, "can I have all your shit after you're dead?" Well, I got so angry. I got myself in my car and I drove to the local hospital, which was a couple hours away. And that's why I say Bobbin he's always treated me with some, makes me laugh at myself for the stupid things I do. He I'm in the hospital, I tell them what I've done. And in the emergency room, they pump out my stomach. And in those days, they had usually men who were called orderlies, and they would be there doing whatever task. They weren't medically trained, they weren't nurses, but they still had patient contact. So I now, after taking the medication the ER doc gave me so that I would throw up, and laying there on my side, just crying, sobbing, and this wonderful black man, I will never ever forget his face. He had enormous eyes, and the doctor had asked him to sit with me because he had to tend to other patients. So this fellow's sitting just, face to face on my side on his gurney, and he's sitting in a chair right there. And I'm crying, and he said, "Son," he said, "that's a damn fool thing you did." And I said, "You don't understand." And he said, "What don't I understand?" I said, "Nobody loves me."
Mm.
He said, "Son," he said, "God loves you." And at that moment, when he said that, what I flashed on was the photo of Baba. I have one message age after age, and that is to love God. And at that moment, I thought, that's my love now. Baba's going to love me, and I'm going to love him. And I didn't need anybody else. So, and then shortly after that, uh, the there were people that I met who were going to New York, both some were going to Woodstock, some were going to the planning to go. This is maybe now 68 or so, because my son was born in 67. He wasn't even a year old when all this was going on. But I had no idea where they were. I still didn't know where my son and ex-wife were. And also, some people were establishing. There was a Baba booth set up at the World's Fair in New York, which I believe I was told, I wasn't there, but I was told Jane Haynes had something. And so I started meeting all these people who knew about Baba. And one friend of mine, whose name was Barry Gold, Barry went off to India probably, well, actually, the first time I went to the center and got on the center, which was just before the Great Darshan, I did not even know Baba had dropped the body. I wasn't on anybody's mailing list or anything. Um, So yeah, I remember my first reaction was anger, and I finally found out about Baba, and here he goes ahead and drops the body. What kind of deal is that? But anyway, so I met this fellow Barry, who was going to India, and Barry was an interesting guy. He had leukemia. He was we were all sort of late 20s, early 30s, and he was in letter contact. He had put together films about Baba to be shown at the local community college in Cocoa Beach. So he was in letter contact with Jal, with Baba's brother, and Jal sent him or put him in contact with people. So Barry put this wonderful show on, and I remember going there to seeing these beautiful photos and videos of Baba in this pretty large size sort of college classroom. And Barry ends up going off to India about 1971 or 72. And when he came back, we were living in trailers at the time in Cocoa Beach, and we were 2 or 3 trailers apart from each other. By the way, I have to go back. His leukemia, the doctors said he had such an incredible heart connection with Baba. When the doctor told him, he said, Mr. Gold, I have, news for you. He said, well, what is it? He said, you have maybe 6 months to live. And Barry at that point stuck his hand out and shook the doctor's hand. He said, thank you. He said, why are you thanking me for that? He said, well, nobody's ever guaranteed me 6 months of life before. Barry ended up living probably 10 years more with leukemia. Ended up dying much later. So off he goes and he would write, when he wrote to Jal, and Jal told him, you come to India. He said, I can't come to India. I have cancer. And Jal, Baba's brother Jal, in one of his letters said, no, he said, you come to India because Baba's going to take the R and change it to an L. So instead of cancer, you'll have cancel. So cancer went into remission, and off he went to India. When he came back from India, he told me that for some reason or other, he felt compelled to give Jal my mailing address and contact info. And so from that time on, I started receiving letters from Jal, from Baba's brother, which led to this, and I would respond to his letters. And I wrote to Erich, and I would write to, the different Mandali, and they all responded. And I would have random questions. I wouldn't consider myself a Baba lover at that time. I was more interested in, like most 25, 27-year-old. I was more interested in my work and making money, and in the meantime, I got married, and Jal would encourage me. He said, you need to come to India. And I said, I can't come to India now. And my wife almost immediately got pregnant. And I said, I can't. I'm working. I am married. My wife is pregnant. I can't afford to go to India. And in those days, letters would take about 2 weeks to go back and forth with blue onion skin, thin sheets of paper. you'd write something and then you fold it in on itself. And so when he would write back, he would always include some message to this unborn child. Like, I miss you, I can hardly wait to see you again. And I'm thinking to myself, what kind of craziness is this? This old man in India is writing to this unborn child and he misses him. And I had been raised a Catholic, so I was not, interested in any of that Eastern stuff. Well, as fate would have it, the child was born Christmas Eve, 1975. So he would be 50 years old now, but he only lived a month and he died. And in those days, these letters back and forth to India would take just about 14 days, 2 weeks. We received a letter from Baba's brother Jal, written on the day the baby died, 2 weeks after the baby died, saying, now you are free, now you can come to. So we thought, well, we better go over there because these people know something. Because we had no answers for, none of the things that we believed in failed us. There was no religion that could explain anything to us. No, all the sort of platitudes that people would say, oh, it's God's will. None of that made any sense to us. But we knew that these people knew something was going on. So then we went off to India that first trip. So I don't know that there's much more detail than that, but that's pretty much my my coming to Baba story in a nutshell.
Thank you. That's an amazing story.
What year was that again, Nick? I didn't catch
Well,
the
let me see. Well, I don't know which year you're talking about. The year
that
I
you
found
went
out
to
about
India. No, that you went to India.
was the summer of '76
Lovely.
because the baby was born Christmas Eve '75
Okay.
and lived about really only lived about a month.
Okay.
And so then it took us 5 or 6 months to get everything together
Mhm.
to go. There's lots of little side. The Mandali were very interested in all this, and they actually recorded to the tiniest detail. Because, for instance, and as I've skipped over most of it, the physician, my wife's obstetrician, was an Egyptian whose name was Anwel al-Hawari. He was an exact double for a young Meher Baba. He lived 3 months. He was a young man, lived 3 months after the baby died, and then he died of a heart attack, but only after asking us about Baba. The medical staff, he was treated at Shands Hospital, which is in the University of South Florida in Gainesville, Florida. And here we are going up to collect his remains after his death. And the nurses and doctors got us in the hallway and asked us for information about Meher Baba. The baby had actually been named by Jal, by Baba's brother. And again, you have to bear in mind, I know nothing about Baba really, not hadn't read anything, knew nothing about India and his family. And here is this crazy brother of his writing to me saying, if it's a boy, name him Rama, and if it's a girl, name her Sita. And you ask me now how that happened, and yes, what did we name the child? Ramajal. And when we got to India and the Mandali wanted to know all the details of this, and when we told him I'm sorry, the name, she threw her head back and started laughing like anything. She said, he told you to name the baby Ramajal? I said, yeah, what's funny about that? She said, well, Rama is, of course, one of the names of God. And Jal is a Hindi word that means net or snare. He said, so you name that child God's snare, God's trap. So all those people who found out about Baba because of that child. So
Thank you for sharing that beautiful story, Nick. It's very beautiful. We have Marcia. She wants to either ask or say something.
yeah, sure.
I'm going to digress a little bit. I know it's your family. You said your family in Cocoa Beach disappeared. Did you ever find them?
Yes, it was. I had to hire private detectives. Um, it's uh, yeah. I hadn't. It took me probably a year and a half.
Is that partly what drove you to? I know you felt that no one loved you. Was that partly why you decided to end your life?
Well,
Sorry.
no. It's okay. I'm very transparent. I just don't want to bore people with
Well, it just
details.
struck. I don't want to talk about myself, but when you were doing all this stuff, I was like, got very, very sick when I went away to college and I almost died. And I'm like, kind of feel like, I feel that I'm here because of God. I'm a gift, you know? And my daughter was pregnant and she was going to have a baby a few years ago, and the baby miscarried and it was supposed to be born on Christmas. So I felt, still feel pain about it, but I can feel your pain. Yeah, but
Yeah,
we're okay now. But it's like, okay,
yeah.
I'll stop blabbing. Right.
No,
I have one more question and then I'll let you go.
well, if I
Okay.
may, hold a
Yeah.
minute. Let me respond to you because now that you put this in context, I'm happy to share. Um, when I was in the military, um, let me back up a minute. I think just about all of us, the human condition is we are looking for causes for why something happens. And we really, eventually, what we have to do, I think, is realize that Baba is the cause and that we have so many lifetimes behind us that a lot of our blessings and our sufferings that we're going through now have already been established in the past. We're just paying the dues for it, as they say, paying it forward. So, what led to the suicide, which actually is, because I remember you were there the other day when I talked about suffering. Um, this is when I was in the military, I was injured on a training mission and I was never treated. I was misdiagnosed. They told me they gave me a mental discharge, a psychiatric discharge, because they told me I was imagining all these physical symptoms. So I lived 50 years. I finally won my case against the government only 10 years ago. So I went 50 years with being accused of making things up, I only within the last year was diagnosed with major depressive disorder, PTSD, and a traumatic brain injury, all stemming from this accident. So that is the cause of the suicide attempt, was the fact that I was going through all this trauma, connected with my military service, even though I was not in combat, was not injured in war. I was in the war, but the fact that we were, you lived in this constant fear that you were going to be shipped away. Now, so it's only in this last year and a half. I mean, I've had marriages that have failed. I had difficulty in relationships, the attempted suicide. It's all stems from an injury that happened, even though it was this lifetime, it happened when I was 20 years old. So I think karma, we have to pay our bills. And we'd like to think that we can track something down. I'll give you, for instance, years ago, I remember reading a very interesting case. It was a woman, probably in her 30s or 40s or so, who was seeing a psychotherapist, and she had been abused as a child. They pretty much were certain that it was this girl's father. And she had nothing to do with her, cut him out from life. They finally built this case and they took this guy to court. And here she is with this expert testimony. And they are she had all the credentials, this, PhD psychotherapist. And they're accusing this guy. Well, when they did try to figure out the dates, he was working in South America during the entire year. That this girl was certain that it was her father who had abused her. Now, of course, the case was dismissed, but the guy's life was pretty much ruined. But what came out of it was that, yes, she had been abused, that nobody was questioning that. But the psychotherapist was trying to fit that narrative from her birth to her death, from her birth to that time she was then. There was no consideration whether that might have happened in a previous life. You see, so if you follow me, so they were targeting this guy because they figured it must have been him, but it wasn't. He wasn't even in the country. So, for I don't know if that helps at all, but when we're talking about depression, suicide, things like that, those could be leftover vestiges of past. And that's the escape that Baba has given us, is to hang on to him. It's the only escape we have. He is the lifeline, or as he said, yeah, hang on to my Daman. If you can't do it with one hand, hold on with both hands. Because you have to, at least for me, I have to replace all those negative thoughts, because for the longest time I was blaming my ex-wives. I was blaming everybody. I wasn't blaming the military. I wasn't blaming a flawed government system, a bureaucracy. So, I mean, I still have people even Baba people, who won't talk to me because in many ways I was verbally abusive, because I had no understanding about what was going on. So now I see a psychologist, I see psychiatrists on a regular basis. And, so somehow or other, we have to balance all of this. It's like being born with it's a little trickier with mental issues, but physical issues, you could be born with a limb missing. Well, that, if you, and then you come in contact with Baba, and if you accept Baba, somehow or other, you have to learn to accept the fact that there is some reason why you were born with that lost limb. We may not know why. We may not, we don't remember past lives but at least to know that it's not just some random thing. God doesn't make mistakes.
That's important to remember. Very important to remember. I'd like to move on to Gail and come back to Alan Ray, who's already asked a question.
Yes.
Go ahead, Gail.
Nick, a hearty and loving J Baba from me and the
Hi.
Chapel Hill group.
Yes. Hi.
Many of the people in this meeting have seen some of the Baba paintings that you sold when you moved from Chapel Hill to Myrtle Beach. And I still have taken good care of the Charlie Mills picture and the Diana
LePage. Yeah.
picture. You sold from your treasures. And one of the things people may not know is you are a long-term resident in Chapel. And if you've told this, stop, because I didn't get to hear the whole thing that you've said. But when the Mandali would come to Chapel Hill, they would stay with Nick. And he had so many of the Baba meetings for years and years at Chapel Hill. So he is beloved and well remembered. And next time I get to Myrtle Beach, I will come and find you, J Baba.
Hey, Baba dear, it's a delight to see you. And yeah, I see you're off driving somewhere. Have a safe journey wherever you are. And it'd be nice to see you again in person.
J Baba, Nick. And
J
I've really learned a lot from this. And I thank Baba that I took Kippy. She had an abscess on her foot and needed a little treatment from the vets today. So I'm driving around picking up medicine and stuff like that, but she's fine. She has a little cone on her face. So I don't think I had Kippy the dog. I'm not sure.
I don't remember.
Yeah. So anyway, I think that was in my jackpot days when I had a different dog, but a hearty, loving J Baba from the whole Baba Chapel Hill group. I'll tell them tonight that had the opportunity. Is this being recorded, Diana?
Yes.
Oh, good. Everybody will want to look it up. So the Baba meeting tonight, I will make sure that everybody knows that it's important to hear your current Baba message. J Baba.
J Baba dear. J Baba.
It's ongoing, Gail. It's every other Monday. Nick is going to be with us. Is that right?
Yes.
Till he runs out.
Oh, good.
Well,
Good.
Yeah, although I'm not sure that I can do 10:30, I might have to ask to find a little later slot because I am I don't sleep well every night, and so there are when that happens, I'm awake in the middle of the night, and then I go back to sleep, and I sometimes I'm asleep at 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning. So my evenings are actually much better than that. So I will talk to Angela and see what can happen. But this is pushing it. I was when I
7 o'clock would be a good time, so you'd have 2 hours before Zoom Arty, you know? Yeah,
well
whatever.
yeah, it's it's tricky because and I don't want to, it's not a, oh, woe is me. It's just a, I'm trying my best. Kitty is my role model. She lived to be 100, so that's what I'm shooting for. Even if I just live to be, another week, that's okay. But my goal is to live to 100. So I find that that requires a certain amount of taking care of myself. So and because I live by myself, I do have nurses' aides. So, for instance, I have an aide coming at 1 o'clock. She goes with me. I get in there's a heated indoor swimming pool, so I can get some exercise. But I have to, like, if I'm gonna have lunch, I have to be off here. I can't come on at 11 and just stay. So it's as I say, it's I say I'll talk to Angela, but we'll see what's available. But mornings, uh, now fortunately I had a decent night's sleep last night, but still, by the time I had coffee and tended to all my personal care, and like I say, now it's 20 of 12. My aide's coming at 1 o'clock. I've got to fix myself some lunch. So it's not a lot of time to hang around extra.
I can appreciate that. There's nothing like sleeping in and getting your sleep. So get your sleep, Nick. That's
Well, it's required. Once 80 is a very magical number, which to me is rather amazing. It's almost like, if you park in a parking meter and you used up all your time, but the old style parking meters would give you maybe 2 or 3 minutes of extra before the alarm would go off. That's kind of the way I feel. Like my parking meter has pretty much expired, as far as but I'm on the reserve gas tank. Let's put it that way.
long may
So
it last.
yeah, yeah, it's yeah, whatever he wants is fine. I feel completely at ease with that. I Erich, when he was asked about um, realization or things like that. He would laugh. He said, "I don't want any of that." He said, "I would take another birth just to be with Baba." And so that is my mantra. I want to come back to be with him, and however many births I have to go through before I earn a place to be with him. Erich used to say, he said, he would point off to a hill off in the distance. He said, "Now suppose you want to get to the top of that hill." He said, "There are a couple of ways you can do that." He said, "You can hire a helicopter and it'll take you right to the top of the hill, drop you off, and you've made the journey." He said, "Or you can struggle and train and take a long time and climb to the top." He said, "Which one do you think is going to bring you more
Sit here.
satisfaction?"
What?
You'll have more satisfaction if you climb it yourself. So, hi, Miss Betty.
So I see Alan Ray has his hand up. Alan Ray, did you want to ask a question?
Thank you, Diana. Okay, so before
sir.
we go further, Nick, thank you so much. My first trip to India was double trouble. Jal Dastur picked me up at the airport and dropped me off at Nargis Dadachanji's in Parsi Gymkhana. Spent a few hours there, worked my way over to VT, that's Victoria Station, caught a train to Pune. And who should I meet in Pune? The other Jalbai, Baba's brother. So I had I had double trouble, Jal Dastur and Jal Irani.
Alan, can I interrupt you a minute, please? May I ask you please to sit still? You're making me dizzy.
Sorry about
Going
that.
going back and forth. It's yeah, my vision's not good, and that's one of the problems I have. So thank you. If you don't mind, I appreciate it.
And I would really appreciate it if you would give me your email address or your phone number. Can we do that now?
We can. I will tell you though ahead of time that my fingers don't work well. I'm pretty much a basket case physically, so I can't do long emails.
I'm not.
I
I'm looking to talk with you. Can you say your phone number so that I can write it down?
yes, it is. Area code is 919
Mm-hmm.
618
Mm-hmm.
2297.
2297.
Yes, sir. And the best time to reach me is late afternoons and evenings. I don't go anywhere after dark. I'm trying to be, like I say, I get in my pool this afternoon. I've got nurses' aides with me during the weekdays, so and I don't tend to, phone calls or anything. I just leave that be.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
You're
I'll be
welcome.
in. Jay Baba.
Yeah. Jay Baba. Jay Baba.
We're coming close to our closing time, but we have Marcia with another question. Will you take
Sure.
that?
Of course.
I just wanted to thank you, and we're flexible whenever you can be here, because we understand, about time and about our bodies and things like that. So we're just glad that you're here, because, I don't know, it's just nice talking to you. But anyway, I was thinking about dreaming and karma, like you talked about past lives, and that, like,
Uh-huh.
I'm always happy when I go to sleep, because I feel like when I'm asleep, that's all these glimpses are things that Baba's bringing up for us to let them out and get rid of them, I think. Am I way off, or can you help us with that?
Well, I think Baba did a beautiful discourse on sleep and dreaming, so I would say would use that. Uh, the problem that I have with sleep, I take certain medications. I don't know if the medications affect how I sleep. What time of day I take them in now? I'm always playing with that, uh, kind of tweaking, for instance. The other thing I found is, because I spend a lot of time focusing on these things because they're so important, um, is what time do I have my last my dinner? Padre uh, used to say that you should eat breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince, and dinner like a pauper. So I'm trying to do that. We in the West have a tendency to have a big meal at dinner at night. Well, I'm not sure that that's wise for me. For everybody else, they can do what they want to do. But for me, it's digestive problems. So last night, for instance, I had a cup of tomato soup and a grilled cheese sandwich. And that was my dinner. So I slept really well last night. Is that the result of that? I don't know. But the night before, I made a stir fry with some beef. I had a terrible time sleeping. The body has to digest all this. And when I was younger, I was very active, but I don't do anything now.
Can you
So,
repeat that? So time for dinner, I got breakfast, eat like a king, and dinner a pauper, but I missed the middle one.
no, lunch like a
Lunch
prince.
is what?
Lunch like a prince.
Like a prince, okay.
Yeah,
That's good
and
advice.
yeah, well, from Padre, from the Mandali, I would say that anything that they said, my experience with them is they never said anything that was going to benefit them. Everything whatever bit of advice they gave anybody was for our benefit. It's, after 40, 50 years with Baba, I think they've earned the right to,
The last time we talked, we had this kind of conversation before you decided to come on Zoom. And we were talking about free will and how we have free will about as much as standing on one leg, and you
right.
can't stand on two legs. I remember that. And there was something on my mind, but I can't remember now. My short-term memory is very short. So, but this is really helpful for all of us because you've had such a great experience. And I met Mani, but I didn't meet Mira, and when everybody was having fun and doing all the concerts and things, I almost passed away. So I'm kind of like, but I did graduate college January 1969. Yay, Baba, right? When he dropped his body. So it was like, but anyway, I can't remember what I wanted to say. So I'll give somebody else a chance to talk. Yeah.
Well, that person could be Nick, and we just have a few minutes left. You have wonderful stories, Nick. So it's up to you how much you want to talk right now. If you want to pick up on anything you've said earlier or think about what you'd like to talk about in the future.
Well, I've got a Mara story I'd share.
Okay.
Um, Seeing as how Mara just came up. This is actually, well, it's quite a wonderful experience because I learned so much. Erich had asked me and my wife, I was married at the time, there was an Australian woman who was only going to be in Nagar for a couple of days. And Erich asked us if we would meet her at the trust compound and escort her to Merazad so she can meet the ladies. And it was a day that Merazad was closed. So we were thrilled with that because then we'd get to go out to Merazad on a closed day. So we show up at the trust compound at the scheduled time, and this lady doesn't show up. And we wait there 1 hour. And I remember exactly, we were to meet, it was either 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock. The Mandali arrived 1 hour later. That was their schedule, either 9 or 10, whatever. Where they would come, Mani, Rano, Erich, they'd come to work in the trust office. So here we are sitting there. This lady doesn't show up, but we wait. And finally, the Merazad car drives up, and Erich comes over to us. He said, "Why are you still here?" And we explained to him that this lady hadn't shown up and we were waiting. And he said, "Be you waiting, what, 1 hour?" I said, "Yeah, we're waiting 1 hour." He said, "No." He said, "Your obligation is 15 minutes. 15 minutes. If she's not here, you go." Now, that was a really interesting lesson for me because later on I worked by scheduled appointments. And that was the rule I went by. You got 15 minutes. And I have 15 minutes. If you were late, you had to compensate me in some way. And if I were late, I would reverse it and compensate you in some way. But 15 minutes was the requirement. So even now, and for those who know about Baba's early days, Baba would always expect people to be there ahead of time. If he was he'd get upset if he said, especially in Myrtle Beach, he's going to be there at 9 o'clock. You better be there at 8:30. You know, it's Fred Winterfeld used to call them the last minute Baba people. People who want to show up later at the last minute. He said, no, with Baba, you always show up early. So off we go about our business. Now, later on, we get a message from Erich. What the reason why this lady didn't show up is she actually went to the airline office in Pune. She was able to delay her trip another day or so. And so now we're scheduled for the next morning. But Erich tells us 15 minutes if she's not here, go. So we go back the next morning. Merazad is still closed. And the lady shows up and we take her out to Merazad. And it's wonderful because she's sitting for those people who are there. We're on Mara's porch. Mara's going in and out of the house. She's sitting right where Meru would usually sit on the steps, right, leading upstairs to Baba's room. She's on that step. Mani would sit there. And my wife and I are sitting at the far end on the porch. And Mara comes out and of course in her most charming ways. And Mara, for those who want, a lot of people never saw Mara. I think, I hope I'm not just projecting. I don't think a lot of people saw Mara move because oftentimes when people would go, especially the men, when people would go to see her at the porch, she'd be sitting. I'm here to tell you, Mara floated. Mara just looked like she was gliding over the surface of whatever it was. And of course, with the long skirts that they would wear, I don't remember seeing her feet. But it was really like an ethereal experience to watch her move around. So Mara asked this lady if she would like tea, and 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 Mara turns to us and says, "Would you like tea?" Of course. Mara goes inside. She comes out a bit later. Mara is carrying a tray. She's got a cup of tea, which she hands to this lady and asks this lady if she'd like milk and sugar in her tea. And this lady, this Australian lady, goes off on a rant about how terrible sugar is. And that's the reason why Indian people don't have good teeth. And he's just going on and on about, making his health issue. And Mara, and of course, we're over there on the other side, and I'm just embarrassed as can be with this lady. And at that point, Mara throws her head back and she's laughing, covers her mouth with her hand. My dear, she said, do you really think that whether or not you eat sugar is going to have anything to do with your love for God?
What a wonderful closing story. The sugar story.
My
Thank you.
pleasure.
Thank you so much, Nick. We're perfectly just right on the dot and for closing time. And I know that you want to go take care of mealtime and the rest of your day. So we're going to let you go, but only if you promise that you'll come back at some point, either 2 weeks or at whatever time. Okay.
I will. I will. It's a delight. I'm happy to chat with people. And, I think the most important thing that we can do, and Baba lovers, is to remind each other. I don't have any more information than anybody else. I mean, I have some experiences that others don't have, but some people quite intuitively know way more about Baba than I do. But we all need reminders. I mean, my daughter, for instance, who grew up in a Baba household, Bao was her grandfather as far as she was concerned. because her own grandfathers both died early. She watched one of the videos that I posted, and her comment to me was, "Thank you for the reminders." So that's what I think we all do, is we remind each other. It's our responsibility to help prod us along so that we don't get too lost going off that chosen path to God. So thank you all, and I look forward to being back.
Okay. Jai Baba.
Yeah, Baba.
Thank you.